Welcome to Starts of Soul, a place where real stories remind us that brilliance, courage, and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Today's story is about a moment that stunned some of the brightest minds in the world. A moment that proved genius does not always come with age, titles, or degrees. Sometimes, it comes with curiosity, courage, and the fearless mind of a child. On a bright autumn morning in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the campus of Harvard University was buzzing with energy. Professors hurried through historic hallways, graduate students debated theories over coffee, and visitors walked across the famous Harvard Yard taking photos. Inside one of the university's oldest lecture halls, a special academic event was about to begin. The hall was filled with professors, researchers, and students from different parts of the world. They had gathered for a challenging mathematics symposium where some of the brightest scholars were presenting complex problems and theories. At the center of the stage stood Professor Daniel Harrow, a respected mathematician known for his sharp mind and even sharper opinions. He was famous for presenting puzzles that many believed were unsolvable, at least not without years of research. That day, Professor Harrow wrote a long, complicated equation across the board. Numbers, symbols, and variables stretched from one side to the other. He turned to the audience and said confidently, "This problem has puzzled researchers for years. Several attempts have been made, but none have successfully produced a simple solution. Some even believe it may not have one." The audience murmured with interest. He then smiled slightly and added, "In fact, I would say solving this in real time would be impossible." The room went quiet as everyone studied the board. Some professors leaned forward, analyzing the symbols. Graduate students whispered theories to each other. Laptops opened, notebooks filled with calculations. But no one stepped forward. Among the audience that day was an unexpected guest. In the third row sat a small boy named Ethan Parker. He was only 9 years old. His legs barely reached the edge of the chair, and he held a small notebook in his hands. Ethan wasn't a university student. He wasn't a math prodigy invited by the conference organizers. He was simply there because of his mother. Ethan's mother, Sarah Parker, worked as a visiting researcher in cognitive science. She had brought her son along because his school was closed for a local holiday. She thought he might enjoy sitting quietly and drawing while she attended the lecture. But Ethan wasn't drawing. He was staring at the board. His eyes followed every symbol Professor Harrow had written. Slowly, he began scribbling something in his notebook. His mother leaned over and whispered, "Sweetheart, are you bored?" Ethan shook his head. "No, Mom," he whispered. "I think he made a mistake." Sarah smiled politely, assuming he meant a small arithmetic slip. But Ethan kept writing. Meanwhile, on stage, Professor Harrow continued explaining the complexity of the equation. He described why previous attempts had failed and why the mathematical structure made the problem extremely difficult. After nearly 20 minutes of discussion, he turned to the audience again. "If anyone believes they have a solution approach, feel free to share." No one moved. Some scholars quietly admitted to themselves that they needed more time to analyze it. But then something unexpected happened. A small hand slowly rose in the third row. At first, Professor Harrow didn't notice. But several people nearby turned to look. The raised hand belonged to Ethan. A ripple of quiet laughter spread across the room. Some assumed the boy simply wanted to ask a question unrelated to the lecture. Professor Harrow adjusted his glasses and looked at him. "Yes," he said politely. "Do you have a question?" Ethan stood up, clutching his notebook. "I think it's not impossible," he said softly. The room became silent. A few people smiled kindly. Others exchanged amused looks. Professor Harrow raised an eyebrow. "You believe you have a solution?" Ethan nodded. "I think there's a shortcut," he said. Sarah Parker felt her face turn red. She gently tried to pull Ethan back into his seat. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the professor. "He's just curious." But Professor Harrow held up a hand. He looked intrigued. "Let him speak," he said. The audience turned toward the boy. Ethan slowly walked toward the front of the room. The massive chalkboard towered over him. Someone handed him a piece of chalk. For a moment, he just stared at the equation. Then he began writing. His handwriting was small and slightly uneven, but his movements were confident. Instead of continuing the complex chain of calculations the professors expected, Ethan erased a small portion of the equation. A quiet gasp spread through the room. Professor Harrow stepped closer. "Why did you remove that term?" he asked. Ethan replied simply, Because it cancels with this part if you reorganize it. He wrote another line beneath it. Then another. The audience leaned forward. What he was doing was surprisingly simple. Instead of attacking the equation directly, he was restructuring it. Grouping variables in a different way. Creating symmetry where none had been noticed before. A professor in the front row suddenly sat up straight. Wait, he whispered. Ethan kept writing. The complicated expression slowly transformed into a much shorter form. Step by step, the impossible puzzle began collapsing into a clear pattern. Professor Harrow's confident expression slowly faded into shock. The boy wasn't guessing. He understood exactly what he was doing. After a few more lines, Ethan placed the chalk down. He stepped back. On the board was a final equation. Clean, elegant, and correct. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The room was completely silent. Then a mathematician near the aisle stood up quickly and began rechecking the steps. Another professor grabbed a notebook and repeated the calculations. Within moments, whispers filled the room. This works. That transformation, how did we miss that? It simplifies the entire structure. Professor Harrow stared at the board. He walked closer and read each step carefully. Every line was correct. Finally, he turned toward Ethan. How did you see that? He asked quietly. Ethan shrugged. I like puzzles, he said. A wave of laughter and applause erupted through the hall. The applause grew louder and louder. Some people stood up. Sarah Parker covered her mouth in disbelief. She had always known Ethan loved numbers, but she never imagined something like this. Professor Harrow walked toward the boy and knelt slightly so they were eye level. Young man, he said, do you realize what you just did? Ethan tilted his head. Did I solve it wrong? He asked. The professor smiled. No, he said. You solved it beautifully. More applause followed. News of the moment spread quickly across campus. By the afternoon, students were already sharing photos of the chalkboard online. 9-year-old solves Harvard puzzle. Child simplifies impossible equation. Within days, the story spread across academic circles and social media. But the most remarkable part wasn't just the solution. It was the lesson behind it. Later that evening, Professor Harrow gave a short interview to the university press. He admitted something surprising. Sometimes, he said, experts become trapped by their own knowledge. We expect complexity, so we search for complex answers. He paused before continuing. That boy saw the problem without assumptions. When reporters asked Ethan how he felt about the attention, his answer was simple. Math is like a game, he said. You just keep trying different moves. His story inspired teachers, students, and parents around the world. Many people began discussing how curiosity should be protected, not limited by expectations. Because sometimes the person who solves the impossible is the one who never learned it was supposed to be impossible. Months later, Professor Harrow invited Ethan and his mother back to Harvard. This time, the lecture hall was full again. But the atmosphere was different. This time, when Ethan walked onto the stage, the audience stood and applauded. Not because he was famous. But because he reminded them of something powerful. Genius isn't only found in prestigious offices or behind long titles. Sometimes it sits quietly in the third row, holding a small notebook. Sometimes it belongs to a child brave enough to raise a hand. And sometimes, the moment someone says, "That's impossible," is exactly the moment a curious mind proves otherwise. Thank you for watching Starts of Soul. If this story inspired you, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us how extraordinary ordinary people can truly be.